Hello, this is Michael Tabb. We are in the third week of the month of May's class in 2018. This is for character creation and development, as well as writing for film and animation, which is basically screenwriting. Uh, I have one student who's shown up to the workshop this month for this class so far, and so we're just going to briefly talk. And I'm going to ask you, Mr. Friday. I know we spoke the other day, but did you have any other questions about anything regarding the homework, what we're doing, the assignment, anything that's bothering you about anything in the class, or about screenwriting in general?
Not particularly. I think I got a lot of the stuff I had in mind checked off my list, thanks to your help. And it's so flexible, being able to jump from the stage to the turning point and through each turning point. Having that outline just makes it so much easier.
It's just a roadmap, What the important difference between writing the script and doing the outline, the important thing is it's you're planning out the trip and you know where you're going and you know where the major turns are. But the important thing for me is when I outline, I never include dialogue. I don't get into crazy details. I keep it simple. I decide the turning points. It's one sentence, one action, one thing that needs to happen, and that tells me where I'm going. And I don't overwrite my outlines because, quite frankly, I don't want to blow the fun that I have writing the actual draft of the script. Because writing that first draft, when you're writing the actual script, for me, is by far the most fun you have in the writing experience. And you're
Mhm.
free to enjoy every moment of it when you know exactly where you're going and you know what you're doing, but at the same time, you haven't locked in things. So it's not like you're copying from one document to another. It's like, oh, this is where I'm going. This is going to be great. I know this character, and this is how. So you're figuring it all out, and you're writing it, and one step doesn't inhibit the joy you will have doing the other. Uh, the thing that sometimes gets boring is if you write an extensive outline, which sometimes you have to do in things like a murder mystery and thriller because you have to plot out the moments of suspense and be clear because that's the genre you have to really plot things out so that
Right.
the reveals happen and don't happen when they're not supposed to, but they're also being set up. That those sometimes require more, and those scripts are a little they're great scripts to write, but there's a little less fun when you write the actual script um, because it's all about now how you execute it because you figure out all the little details. It's not a free slide anymore. It's a very guided tour. So I like the light outline. Um, I figure out certain things. I know what characters are supposed to be doing because we've plotted out all of our characters, and you just let them do what they're supposed to do.
Right. I guess that does lead me to a question.
Great.
Um, I'm curious about how to manage the mood and the energy of the entire piece as I go through the all the stages and the turning points. Because if I pick a genre, let's say drama,
Yes.
um, I do want the story to escalate. I want the stakes to get higher as we go along.
Right.
Um,
So when you
but
come up with the beats, when you come up with the premise, it should bring to mind situations. You can make a list of the situations that premise brings to mind that you want to put your character in, and then you
Mhm.
reorder those in order of which stakes are higher for which thing to help the
So is
flow.
there are there guidelines for when to lighten the mood?
Um, well, for the purposes of this class, in 10 pages, you don't really have time for that unless
Gotcha.
you're really doing a comedy, in which case you're always lightening the mood.
Mhm.
But the key is you want to really hit the specific genre you've chosen very hard. In a drama, you'll want to make sure that you're constantly hitting the tone of the drama is when you do your drama brainstorm, you're going to come up with things like drug overdose, drinking and driving, car accident, going to jail, custody battles, and things like that. And you will be able to pull those moments that scream drama and use those in your story as the major turning points.
Right.
Because
And then it's a matter of putting them in a sequential order that it just gets worse and worse and worse.
Absolutely. So that's why you have the drama brainstorm, and then after you've written a first draft of the story, don't forget you can go through it and make sure every beat you read it for just making sure the tone is right. You can go back to your list of drama images you've come up with and expand upon them, or just look at them and see if there are some drama bits that you could add to your story to make it better and make your point more poignantly, that
Mm-hmm.
you might go back and add into the story if it doesn't throw anything off course. You don't want to just add things to make it dramatic. That's not a good idea. But if they
Right.
add to the drama and help you escalate the problem that they are having and makes the drama that you have created better,
Mm-hmm.
then it's worth doing. So you look for different ways, and sometimes you'll get a perspective of um, you know like divorce is a horrible dramatic situation, but it may set up a character's lack of ability. Like, for example, if somebody doesn't trust people and that's their flaw, you might look at it, see divorce on your list of drama, and say, oh, that's why he doesn't trust anybody, uh, is because the people who are supposed to love him most left him. And you can take something from that list of drama and add it to the situation based on what their inner and outer journey is.
Gotcha.
And
So
then,
if
yeah, you can
no,
do
go ahead.
you can do you can do a genre check after you've written the script as well as before. Don't forget, the first draft is just, it's what we affectionately call the vomit draft, and you just, once you know what the plot points are you're hitting, just write the whole thing. Don't stop, don't edit, don't go back. I know it's hard. If you get ideas for things, but it would call going back and complicating and rewriting, make yourself a note on what you want to do, and then get back to finishing the script, and you can make that change later. The key is to get, unless the note in your head that you want to change about the script is something that changes the whole second half of the movie or whatever comes after that point, then finish the story and then go back and add it. Because the key is to just get a draft out there, because the great writing comes in editing. Editing
Okay.
after the fact is where you figure out what you need, what you don't. You build out things. Then you contract them. You realize, you know what, I don't need this, but I do need that. Oh, the wording, I didn't take the time to think about the wording, and I can word this better, and I can give this line more punch, and I can make this banter stronger and quicker and more fiery. I could add this. I could put it in this location and give it a different level of nuance and subtext. If instead of setting this scene of them sitting in a living room or a coffee shop talking, what if I put it in the middle of a what's it called, a war zone in the middle of a paint palette war, you know, it's, you give a physical example of one character is not helping the other one and not doing it, and the other one literally lets the other one get shot in the paint palette war. It's like, and then you have a physical example of something exemplifying what's happening. Things are going to constantly, you're going to find ways to constantly improve the script once you get it down. So the key is to make sure you have an outline so that it's easy for you to get it down, and then just get it on the paper, vomit it out. The first draft can be 10 pages, or if it needs to be more the first draft, go ahead. I'm not grading the first draft. You guys are giving each other feedback on your first draft, and then by the end of next week's draft, the week 4 draft will need to be 10 pages or less. Um, I have a 4 to 5 page script of my own that I've written. Um, and I know you can do a full 3 act story with a beginning, middle, and end, because I've done it in 4.5 pages.
Hmm. Yeah, I find that impressive in the sense that as I try to create the 8-page script, really,
Yes.
at my skill level, uh, I get I get caught up in the action lines,
Hmm.
and it starts to lengthen the script. So I'll throw in the 3 lines of action lines, and then my character may have 1 line of dialogue, and then I got to come back with more action lines. And I find that quickly the script is getting longer and longer before I even realize it.
Let it get longer first. The key is to get
Right.
everything down there you're thinking about using. And then in the end, the thing you may thought that was going to work the best may not work well, and you may want to cut it. And the stuff you weren't sure was going to work winds up coming out in a beautiful way, and you're like, "Holy crud! I didn't realize that's the heart of the movie right there."
Right.
I don't know if you know this, but a lot of people, I don't know if you are science fiction fans, whoever listens to this, but in Star Trek Two, the original script did not have the goodbye scene between Spock and Kirk at the end. He just sacrificed himself and he died. There was no conversation there.
Right.
And one of my teachers was friends with the guy who wrote it. And when she read it as a friend, she said, "You don't realize what you have here between Spock and Captain Kirk is actually one of the greatest romance stories of all time between brothers of another ilk. And you
Right
have to
on.
give them a goodbye scene." And of course, that scene is without that scene, the movie doesn't work.
Yeah, I was noticing something similar yesterday. I was thinking similarly along, sci-fi or fantasy. I was thinking about the Lord of the Rings when Gandalf falls off the cliff and says, "Fly, you fools!"
Yes.
And how I remembered how I felt waiting for the next film to come out years later,
Hmm.
and wondering like how are the characters going to even have the strength to want to finish their required task. And then I thought about Romeo and Juliet and how it needed to end very quickly after Juliet killed herself. Like I
Yes.
couldn't imagine Romeo restarting his life, and like the two death scenes from the two different movies and the two different genres had a different sense of time when it came to a main character dying. I started to kind of draw the dots and the connections between the two to realize that the same thing you're saying about Spock and Kirk. Like you can have unfinished business, but it has to serve not just the story but also the viewer at the end of the day.
Yes.
It's
It does.
challenging to
And it
find
has
those.
to give the audience what they need from that,
Right.
and what the the writer has in a sense promised them or offered them by creating that situation the way that they have.
Right. Because it is tempting to kill a sweet, wonderful character and just leave it at that for the emotional punch and to
Well,
not
that's the
not
point.
finish tying the loop.
Well, that's exactly it. It's doing the outer journey, but not finishing the inner journey, because you're going to plot the outer journey very detailed in a very detailed fashion. You're going to know what you're doing and what has to happen. But sometimes the nuances of how that happens, that comes in the discovery and the rewriting process of going through your story and realizing, now that you have the plot down there, how do you make it better? How do you make it more impactful and more emotional and more gripping, and make sure you give the audience the sense of you did the job, and you gave them everything they needed out of the moments that were most important. Um,
Right.
so just yeah, you just get it done, and then you put the things that you feel are missing into it uh, next time through. And the great thing is you'll have, um, when you turn in your first draft of this script on Friday, you'll have three fellow students, or one, at least one other student. Sorry, one a student give your script the once over in the way you always wish somebody else would when you write a first script at home. And you'll get somebody else's perspective. And you may agree with nothing they say. 9 times out of 10, 99% of the time, when they say there's a problem, there is a problem. And 99% of the time, when they tell you what the problem, how to fix that problem, they're incorrect, because they don't know what the author intended. So it's going to give you, if you're not sure what it needs, because we write on such a fast time frame in this program because it's accelerated, that should help you kickstart your rewrite process
Mhm.
before you start the next week.
That's good. I have to admit that it's challenging to give feedback. I mean, it's great to receive it in whatever form it comes. So I'm thinking on the other side of that of giving the feedback, because I feel sometimes like I don't know what I'm looking for at the expert level that they might need it. Um,
That's why
so
I,
I'll
I use
notice
a
the
lot
things that I'm great at, but I won't notice the things that I'm not so great at. And I guess that's great because we have three sets of feedback most of the time,
of.
and somebody's going to cover most of the things, but I worry. I do worry that the feedback is not accurate.
That you're giving?
Right, especially when like an example is premises. Premises will come across that I'll notice, and they'll seem fine to me, and then um, I'll hear a note later on my own premise and realize, oh man, like that other person did the exact same thing that I was
I
advocating
didn't
that they
catch
should
it.
continue.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. You know what though? That this is how we learn. Unfortunately, the fortunate thing is that we have these classes online so that people can have the training of a great program from wherever they are in the country, no matter how rural or remote, which is amazing. The hard thing is that we're not there in a classroom at the same time where when somebody says something incorrect to another student, I can't necessarily be there. And if I monitored everything that closely, I would never have time to grade. So,
Right.
uh, um, or do my own writing, which is what makes me a pro, which is why you want to learn from me. So,
Yes,
uh,
sir.
but that's part of the process is even you giving feedback and realizing you're not giving good feedback is part of the teaching process you're going through in this class because you're learning to say things and you're figuring out things and you're saying things and then you're realizing as you're getting feedback on my end, wait a minute, that's what it should be, that doesn't work like that, oh crud, but you're catching it more and you're getting more understanding of what's wrong with it because you've not only thought it and made the mistake but because you've marked it on someone else
Right.
and your brain is thinking, believe it or not, you learn as much if not more from giving feedback as you do from doing.
I can imagine that.
and and that's why it's so important to have you guys giving each other feedback all the time. And that's also, when you're working on feedback, what you should be doing is you go through the lessons. What were the lessons for this assignment, and look at them and just see if the lessons are being applied. Like there's the excellent formatting guide that I send to everybody attached to the document, for formatting your screenplay this week, right? I sent that's to everybody. You should be looking at that and going through the script and saying, okay, this says there should be no, in the action lines, passive verbs. Is, are, ing, everything. So then you go through the script and mark at least three of those. And then after the third one, you go, okay, this error persists. I'm only marking three. You need to find the rest and get rid of them. You go back to the thing. You
Gotcha.
say, "Ooh!" It says one of the things is there. You're not allowed. You have to spell out numbers in dialogue because people say numbers in different way. Whether it's a time, whether it's how much money, whether it's whatever, you have to write it out. So when people write out, just put the numbers in dialogue, like a 1 and a 6 instead of 16, and spelling it out, you know that that's a problem. Then you can go through the script and mark up to three of those. Believe me, you will find at least 10 errors to mark that way in a 10-page script.
Right. That makes a lot of sense.
And that's why
Can we?
just use the cheat sheets I've given you for. And then next week, if you're having trouble with those, next week there's an editing cheat sheet. Go ahead and grab that from next week's editing lesson. Download that cheat sheet and use that as a key to find more mistakes. The truth is that last month in the screenwriting class you're taking now. Last month, I had one student give another student 104 notes on under 10 pages.
Wow.
It just goes to show you people make the errors. They're there if you stop and take the time. Do not turn in feedback notes with under 30 real errors being marked, and make sure you, regarding the homework, guys, you got to make sure you follow the rules. I can't tell you how many people mess up this week's assignment in screenwriting class by not following the simple rules of there are minimums on the amount of notes you have to give, and you have to have three things in your feedback for each note. One is where the problem is. Two is the rule on why it's wrong. And three is an example of how to fix it. You got to do all three things for each of the 30 notes for 10 pages. You have to do 3 notes a page, and most scripts will be 10 pages or more at this point. So you have to give at least 30 notes, and you're only allowed to use each note up to 3 times. So you got to find 10 different notes, but it shouldn't be that hard.
Right.
Okay, that was
Can
an
we
important review. Go ahead.
can we talk about animation real quickly?
Absolutely.
So I'm I did a little bit, a very little bit of research on some animated shorts, and one of the articles that you had us read also said that most of the really great animated shorts now um, don't have dialogue, and I can see why. I was just curious what that looks like on paper. Is it just a page
Action
after
blocks,
page of
blocks of
action line?
action. Yes. And keep the action blocks. I like to keep all my action blocks no longer than 3 lines each, not 3 sentences, 3 lines, because it creates a pace on the page. And the faster the action is supposed to be happening, the shorter the lines of action you use. So when it gets down to gun battles and things firing, sometimes you only put one. You put Jason opens fire. These guys dive for cover because the faster the shots are happening are going to be the faster you break up paragraphs.
Gotcha. So does that mean that you're going to want to tie uh, one beat per action block of 3 lines, or
One beat.
is there a different way to organize how those action lines come across?
There's no set and finite rule, but I'll tell you how I like to do it. I picture each block. Now, we can't tell a director how to direct, and we
Right.
can't tell them what shots to use. Really annoys them. But what we can do is what I do is I put my paragraphs of action, I organize them according to shot. So this is what you would gather from this. I see this shot covering the two. I see it being a two shot, and these two guys are facing each other, and one of them is pulling out a gun, and the other one reaches and he pulls out a handkerchief.
Right.
You know, and then the guy wipes his head with the handkerchief, and the other one keeps his gun on the other guy's head. You know, so that's all. That would all be in one block. I would
Mhm.
keep the blocks to 3 lines long, and then break it. And if you see it as a longer shot, then break it up into actions, into how it may be covered. I mean, there are some scenes I can see being covered in one stagnant shot, but if there's if it's this person doing this and then this people are approaching, that would be 2 separate paragraphs for me.
It sounds like the transition from action block to action block comes at decision points, new decision points. At
Yes,
least in the example that
that's
you
a
just
great way
gave.
of putting it.
All right, I'll see if I can design something like that. Maybe not for the whole thing, but I'm definitely curious to see how that actually works.
Just remember that every piece of action you put in a scene needs to be important to the story. Meaning, the next thing that happens wouldn't happen unless you did it, and two, it reveals something about the character we didn't know before that is extremely unique. Not just they smoke. So, for example, you never put in a script somebody takes a sip of coffee or they
Right,
take a drag of their cigarette. Let the actor and the director decide when they can take a puff. You don't need to say long pause. You let the actors and the directors decide to pace the scene because different actors, we have no control over who gets cast. And when the director casts somebody in the film, that actor is going to have a way that that actor would best do that line. And it's not the same as if a different actor did that line the best that they would do it,
right,
because certain actors play certain things and types of characters better. So you can't micromanage the details of how a character is going to perform something, because one character would make more sense for them to get nervous and jittery, and for another actor it would make more sense to be angry and attacking, based on how the kind of character and how they personify the person and their goals. So you don't micromanage in the act. You just focus on what is being done and how does that change the next beat when they're both
right.
going after what they want.
And how does it impact or further along their inner journey through the
Absolutely,
outer actions?
that's right.
Okay. I mean, it sounds so simple, right? It sounds super simple. It's
It's
so much
super
harder to do.
complicated and super simple all at the same time. It's
It's
like
like juggling.
premise. Premise is the simplest thing. Have an opinion about something,
Hmm.
and don't say what everybody else has already said. It's not a complicated idea, but in execution, it's actually one of the hardest things to figure out how to do properly. Premise to me is the hardest part of the process because, and as I write the script, sometimes I wind up, the further I get into it, realizing that it may work if I add this detail to the premise, or I may need to change something, and that changes the inner journey, which then it changes what everybody else is doing. So but the idea is to have something that makes sense and to have it be unique and have it keep moving forward. The our our job seems as writers so easy because it's just, oh, we're having fun, we're creating characters, and you give them drama and there's conflict, fun, right? It's just so incredibly complicated, but it's wonderful and it's fun for us. It's basically we get paid to daydream, but we have to do it really, really well.
Mhm.
Anyway,
One more question about animation. Uh, so there's 2D animation like Looney
and by
Tunes,
the way, you
or
can
there
use dialogue in animation, guys. It's absolutely
you can.
acceptable. But it's just if you look at all the shorts they put, for example, before the Pixar movies now, most of those have absolutely no dialogue. It's a situation, it's discovery, it's awe, and then it's comfort, and then a reaction. And that's it. It's all about the discovery of something. And and if they're doing it alone, you don't. There's no interaction to have. You don't have characters, right? You don't write dialogue for characters who are by themselves. People talking to themselves is incredibly looked upon. It's frowned upon in most in most writing uh, thinking, because what having a character speak out loud to themselves means is that the writer has no idea how to visualize this, and what we're doing is writing in a visual medium, so it says something about the skill sets of the writer and their ability to do the job of telling a story visually.
Yeah.
Anyway, you were going to ask another question. Sorry.
No, that actually leads right into my question in a weird way. So, the how what are the trademarks, maybe is the right word, of the difference between writing for a two-dimensional story like Wile E. Coyote runs off the cliff and then hangs there in midair, looks down, looks at the camera. You know, like how you tell that story
Sure.
in 2D animation. Is there a similar kind of thing that separates CGI animation that can clearly tell the director that that's what you're aiming at, the type of animation?
You don't. From what I have written for Disney feature animation, and I have written for live action, and I will be honest, I include different kinds of moments. Like you can have the pause between the realizing they've made a mistake and then looking down and seeing the mistake, and then they fall. It's like he runs off the cliff and then freezes in midair, looks down, sees there's 100-mile drop, looks up and goes, "Uh oh," and then he falls. You can
Right.
play with the reality, but how you write it doesn't change a thing. So the way you execute the beat, you can have more fun with it. The idea of writing animation, what I try to remind people is when you're writing animation, the whole idea of making something animation is because you can do things in animation that do not work in live action.
Right.
You can do not only because it costs you the same to blow up a city as it does a house in animation, but in live action, not the same thing. Huge
Yeah.
budget difference, but the same thing. It costs you a fortune more to have a character decide to get in a spaceship, rocket off to the moon, grab a rock, bring it home, paint it pink, and give it to his sister and say, "I want you to know you mean the Earth and the moon to me." But in a live action movie, you're not going to really have the budget to do that probably,
Right.
and it's not accepted and it's not as needed. You because everything, no matter what you're drawing in animation, costs the same. And you can also get away with certain sensibilities and sense of humors, like the pause before you fall, those
Hmm.
kind of things that work for animation. And so you want to play to the strengths of animation. And if you're not playing to the strengths of animation, there's no reason to be writing it to be animation.
Right.
So
Yeah,
we
that's what
always say
I'm
if it,
starting
if
to
it doesn't
realize.
have to be animation, then it's
Hmm.
not. then you haven't done your job as a writer creating an animated piece.
Gotcha. So we pay attention to the rules of the world a
Yeah,
lot, and that'll help us shape.
yeah.
For instance, like Wile E. Coyote has a completely different set of physics than Wreck-It Ralph.
Yes, and you can write about. I mean, Tron is about a guy who goes into a video game or into a computer mainframe, and that's one thing. But when Wreck-It Ralph does it, it's very different. And
Right.
the sensibility of how they do it makes sense for it being either live action or animation.
Got it. Yeah, that's very helpful. That's a great correlation to think about.
Yeah.
Well, cool. That's all I've got. Thank you.
No, it's my pleasure. Mr. Wilcox has joined us. Do you have any questions? Please feel free to unmute your microphone if you'd like. And if you don't, that's fine. I just want to make sure I address any questions to anybody who shows up. Mr. Wilcox, are you there? No? Okay. I saw the he unmuted his microphone, then he muted it again. So I'll assume, Mr. Wilcox, if you have any questions, please feel free to ask. That's all. Um, Regardless of that, I've spoken a little bit about what we expect from this weekend's assignment. It can be over 10 pages this week, but next week it cannot. So just get it out, write the whole story, the beginning, middle, and the end. Go back and edit as much as you can, as much as you feel would make it better before you turn it in on Friday. And then on Sunday, everybody's going to give you feedback. I am not going to grade your first draft of your script. And for many reasons, starting with nobody should have a first draft of their first script critiqued by me because I will mark everything, and you. It's better to have friend feedback. Like when I layer my feedback, when I get feedback on a script, like for example, I just finished a script myself. I finished one for producers, and then I gave me and the producer gave it to five friends of mine and two script authorities for one draft, and then did another draft, and then gave it to three more writers, and two of which were WGA writers and script critiquers, professional, like big name guys who are all friends of mine who do it for free. And they gave me feedback, and then we finished the draft, and now he's out to the financiers to get the financing for it. But you go through rounds of getting feedback before you turn it into somebody who's going to judge the material and assess your talent and what needs to be fixed. Um, and it's the same here. So you're going to want to you share it with your peers. You get some feedback from people you trust. Then next week you're going to want to edit it. I always edit something twice before I show it to anybody, and so you'll edit then next week, and you'll get a whole new set of editing tricks, tools, and tricks from the editing lesson next week, which you'll then apply to help make the script shorter, and make sure you gather out. Remember, you're going to only need to put great detail into the moments that you want the audience to stop and take notice. Everything else should be really moving in the script. You know, things are escalating, things are moving, and then the only time you really feel the script kind of give you a little jolt of a pause is maybe you take a little bit longer in those moments that are like life changing, like the midpoint or the one sentences that we use for the major structural points. You can take a heavier beat on those moments, but other than that, the story keeps moving. The story keeps moving. It keeps building. It keeps getting more exciting, and we keep going, and it gets boom, 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 and then boom. You have 10 pages to do that in. And if you are able to tell a full 3-act story in a proof of concept story, all in under 10 pages, the key is that you're going to impress people with your ability to tell a story. You're going to not only show them you can tell a full story, but you can actually tell a complete story with a beginning, middle, and end, not just tell a story or a peak or something like that. Um, Anyway, so that's that assignment, and I will be grading to make sure everybody gave each other worthy feedback. What I grade this week is the feedback you give between Friday and Sunday on each other's scripts. There are a lot of rules on a lot of things you should be marking on the scripts, and if you're missing a lot, you're not following the rules on what to mark and how often to mark and what's going on, there are going to be deductions. And that's what I'm grading. I'm grading to make sure you are doing the review, because the more you're going to review on other people's scripts, the easier it's going to be next week for you to look back at your script and say, you know what, I marked this all over the other guy's script and I missed it in my own. Because sometimes you can't see a forest through all the trees. So, and that's okay. That's natural. That's why I have you looking at somebody else's scripts and checking it this week. And then you're going to learn from doing that. And then you're going to turn around and be able to apply it more to yourself, because you'll have more experience and understanding in how to do that. But you did it on something that you're not emotionally tied to or invested in because you didn't write it. So you'll go through the practice of editing, and then you'll be able to start applying those practices to your own script early next week. Now, in the other class, character creation and development, this week we are doing the most important thing, which is outlining all the different character types. Make sure that you have the premise that and the genre, which illustrates the premise is the nut, the bolt on which everything is teetering on. Around that premise is an inner journey that exemplifies how you plan on proving that premise is true. Then you have the outer journey, and then you have the antagonist who has his or her own goal that puts him or her in direct opposition to what the protagonist is trying to accomplish in their outer journey. You have the love interest who is inspiring the inner journey, and you have and it has three different ways. You have to have three different ways that the love interest is physically inspiring the protagonist to achieve their inner journey. And then you have the mentor and the protagonist reflection characters. The mentor is the one teaching the protagonist how to achieve the outer journey that the antagonist is trying to stop them from achieving, because it gets in their way. And then the reflection character is the friend or support system, or the backup, or the reminder. It's the ally. The protagonist reflection character is the ally, but not necessarily the teacher, but the reminder, the supporter, the best friend, whatever, of the protagonist in that situation and trying to achieve. And they're supporting them in trying to achieve the outer journey. So everybody's related to these journey. Everything leans on everything. Everything is a house of cards. If you mess up one of these things, if you mess up the premise, then if the premise doesn't make sense, then nothing else above it can make sense, because everything is built off of the premise. Then the inner journey. If you mess up the inner journey, you can't create a love interest to properly help the inner journey happen. And if you don't have a good inner journey, you don't you the question is whether you can have an outer journey that actually helps you accomplish the inner journey. And then if you don't have a solid outer journey that is a physically accomplishable task that is in the physical world, then you can't build somebody to support it, somebody to conflict with, and then somebody to teach how to do it. So everything is built on everything, and you pull out one card, and that's why it's so important. This is each of these things and these characters seem so simple, but they all are leaning heavily on one another so strongly that if you mess up one, the house of cards comes down. So it's really important to think these things through. And that's this week. You're going to nail down all the characters. And then next week, you'll wind up writing a scene that introduces your protagonist in the way we talked about in the dossier we did in week two. All right. So those are the assignment reviews. Does anybody have any other questions before we end this training session today?
We're supposed to keep it PG, right? So I'm asking because sorry, say that one more time.
PG-13.
Gotcha. So that means no vulgarity or suggestive themes.
I believe PG-13 you're allowed 2 to 3 curse words.
Gotcha.
Only one F word. And sometimes if it's used in a certain way, that you can't use it even that. But just don't go. Look, keep in mind that there are people who are students in your classes, and you don't know what their personal belief systems are and how religious or devout they are. And some people get nightmares really easily. Some people really don't like foul language. Some people are sensitive, and so they have to read your work and give you feedback on it. So I understand you have a personal voice, and if you're writing a horror film, you need to include some horrific stuff, otherwise it doesn't qualify. but just try not to go overboard, and know that you can go overboard in another draft as you write it for yourself later if you need to. But we try to make it so the students. We've had students complain about the kind of things other students were writing in class, and that they were incredibly affronted and didn't want to be at a university that was doing this. Like, no porn. Nobody should be writing a porn movie. It's, you don't need it. But scary is good. Scary is fine. Just don't don't get grotesque. You can have blood, yes. Things like that. Death, yes. Sneaking up on people, yes. All that's fine. It's just, you know, there are things that you wouldn't include showing if that's possible. Okay?
Yeah, that was
Yeah.
the crux of that problem is like when you want to heighten the life and death circumstances, but
You
and
can
also
heighten
heighten
things
the
without
emotional
violence.
impact.
You can heighten
Right.
without violence, and you can heighten dialogue without cursing. And like for example, I do use cursing in my scripts, but I literally save the curse words for the moments literally that are supposed to make the audience go. They shock and they shudder, and it's a major turning point. I do not use curse words uh, throughout the script because there are very few words that have impact on a listener anyway that really get a reaction. And when you get words that do that, if you words use explicit words in average ways, you will take the power of those words away for the times when you want to have that power in a scene. So yes, you can curse, but once. Save it for where it really counts, where you really want it, where you really want that punch. You don't need to abuse it. It's just a good trick to writing in general. If you do something too much, it gets boring. It's like an action movie. If it's all action and the stakes are all the same all the time and there's no build, believe it or not, an action movie can be incredibly boring. Oh, look, now they're climbing here, and now they're doing that, and now they're doing that, and more of that without a personal investment, without things getting more difficult, without something being on the line. It's just more. What makes more is more of it, meaning you have somewhere to go. That doesn't mean you start small because you always have to have conflict. Even in scenes without an antagonist, every scene needs to have conflict. Even if it's two guys on the same team, there should be a conflict or a disparity between how each of them wants to go about doing, even if they want to do the same thing, they want to do it differently. Like if you watch the original movie of Lethal Weapon, Murtaugh and Riggs, you can't find two more opposite guys to be partners. One of them's old, he's on the verge of retirement, and he just doesn't want Riggs to shoot anybody today. And the other one is suicidal. He doesn't care if he lives, he doesn't care if he retires, and he is reckless. So you have Mr. Safety, and so you put those two guys in a room, and even if they're on the same task, they are going to conflict. And that's what we want in our scenes. We want to make sure our characters are so well defined that how they differentiate from each other and the conflict that creates is clear to the audience and to the scene when you write it. Anyway, okay. Any other questions? Okay. Well, thank you both for coming. I appreciate that. You sure you don't have any questions? All right. All right. Have a great night, great day. I will post this for those who didn't get a chance to attend. And thank you for coming out. And best of luck with all your work this week, everybody.